Hey friends, this is Mark Suroviec, host of the Workplace Solutions podcast, inviting you to discover the joy of work. All right. You ready for part 2, Rhonda?
I'm ready for part two. Get that?
Part 2. Rhonda, part 2 of what? What are we talking about today?
Where's the 8 R's of leading activities?
Yes, the 8 R's of leading activities. And we'll do a uber quick icebreaker.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to go from this new deck I'm playing with, number 50, a time I had to apologize for ruining something.
Oh gosh, I still have to do that daily. I'm kind of a ruiner. I like to be the ruiner. So let me see. I've apologized a lot. Mostly lately, I have to apologize to my 3-year-old granddaughter who I seem to ruin everything. Like she's playing a game and it's, that's not how you play that game. I'm like, well, what do you want to do with it? Because this is how I know it. No, you do it this way. So mostly in matching. And I hate to say this, she always beats me in matching too. I think she has a memory I don't. Hence the reason you have great notes for these conversations. So yeah, I think that would be it.
Having children makes this a very target-rich conversation. Yeah, children or grandchildren. I'm going to go with the time I took Peggy to play disc golf. And so I'm a big fan of disc golf, love getting outside and throwing. And that was definitely one of my pandemic hobbies because you can be outside 6 feet away from other folks and still be active. But we were playing and I was on the 4th tee on a course near here. And I didn't realize that Peggy had wandered up ahead. I was focused on my disc and just getting ready to my throw. And I just unloaded on my drive and it hit her in the back of the head. She was probably about 50 feet away. And
yikes.
She just fell over and started bawling. And she has not played since then. So I'm just like, oh.
I don't think I blame her. I mean, yours is way worse than mine. Mine is a card game. You're hurting your kid.
Well, not on purpose. It was an accident. She's fine. She doesn't have any brain injuries.
I love it.
But yeah, and of course, my wife was there, and she immediately looks at me like, do you see? Like I'm throwing in a field of like 300 feet. What are the chances I'd actually? Oh, apparently 100%.
Yeah, there you go.
And if you play disc golf, you know because trees are often the width of somebody's head, and you're hitting those all the time. All the time.
Well, you definitely will not have a Frisbee golf partner in Peggy. Let me tell you that.
She'll forget it eventually.
Because you hit her in the head.
So Rhonda, can you, just for part 2, read that list of the 8 R's again, and then we'll talk about reflection.
We sure can. We started with reasons, results, recommendations, readiness, rules, and risks. And now we're moving on to resources and reflection.
Thank you. In the previous episode, we talked about the first 7 of those 8, and we're going to talk about reflection here in a minute. This is a sneak peek into some content that we are developing for a Train the Trainer workshop we are calling Bring Training to Life, how to make learning more fun, memorable, and effective. So if you are...
When is that kickoff date for that?
It depends on when people buy it.
Well, I think that's any Train the Trainer is amazing.
Yeah. So we've got some folks interested. I am working on it now. So.
Nice. I love that.
No, that's a great question. And I am still learning to be a business owner. So
it takes time and patience. Yes.
It takes time.
Good job.
We left off with risks and risk management. So the 8th R of leading an activity is reflection. They're all important, but this is what you are going to do as a facilitator to debrief or process or ask people to reflect on the activity. So this might be, what questions do I ask? What topics am I going to mention? What observations am I looking out for? What methodology or tools will I use to walk people through the experiential learning cycle, which in the episode where we covered that, we talked about experience, observe, reflect, and apply. In addition to just doing something that's fun, this is why folks are including this in a training, or this is why folks are coming to you as a team building professional. So the reflection is essentially important. And earlier in my career, I love activities so much that I would spend all this time like designing the perfect activity, making sure the rules were clear, the equipment looked amazing, that experience was wonderful, and it would end and I'd just be like, oh crap, what are we going to talk about?
What did that mean?
Yeah, and they're looking at me like, I don't know, you're the one who works here. And yes, good facilitators can think on the fly, and there are people much more gifted than myself in being able to be like, oh yeah, that's... But thinking back to those reasons, the reasons and the reflections are so closely related, which is why they were part of the second edition 6 R's. So reflection. We'll use the Keypunch example again. If you don't know what Keypunch is, go back and listen to the first half of this episode. An example for Keypunch might be the question, what steps did your team take to improve its efficiency? Does your team have a method or system to improve or change? Does it need one? Or something like the statement, the Navy SEALs have a saying, fast is slow, slow is smooth, smooth is quick. What does this mean? And how does it relate to what you're doing? At the end of the day, there needs to be significant time to this idea of reflection. So I've mentioned this several times before, and I'm going to mention it again because I think he's incredibly wise. So my good friend Roger Greer, one of my favorite trainers, likes to say you should spend 50% of your time on planning the activity and 50% of your time on how you're going to lead the reflection when the activity is over. That means 50% of your time is spent on the first 7.
Yes.
Yeah, it's important. It's absolutely important. And it's what honestly separates a really masterful facilitator, trainer, presenter from someone that just knows the rules and has memorized the activity guide or is reading it and helps walk groups through that experience and that learning.
I'm thinking about this in the context of the reasons to begin with, and then the results. And I this thing came to my mind. It's like people could do this even if you were going to promote someone and you wanted to test their leadership skills. Something like this would be a great way to say, how did you lead that group? Where do you think your strengths are? So it's visible, because we ask people all the time, how do you think you're doing it? And that just crossed my mind, Mark. That's another whole piece of that. Yeah, thank you.
Rhonda, I'm going to put you on the spot. I want you to think of a time when a child who was old enough to tell you a story told you a story and it was like nonsensical for a bit.
Meaning I have no idea what you're talking about?
No. Like sometime where you were listening to a child tell a story and you're just like nodding because you're like, what are you going on about? And then at some point in that conversation, you realize, oh, this is what they're talking about. And then it suddenly makes sense. Has that ever happened to you?
I'm sure it has. I can't think of an example. And my mind is laughing and rolling around going, yeah, that happens with my granddaughter all the time. I'm like, what are you talking about? And she is old enough to tell a story, but I can't think of anything in particular. I can't think of anything that I can give a good example of, Mark.
Okay, that's fine. My elder daughter, Peggy, when she was, I think in second grade, I started really noticing this. So she would come home from school and start telling me about something, and it'd just be a disjointed order of events. And then Susie did this, and we had to do that. And then Bob sat near me, and then Amari poked at him. I was like, back up. Where are you? It's like, oh, we were on the bus. Okay.
Okay.
And that detail of we were on the bus frames the entire story for you. So now you have context to say, Peggy is telling a story about her friends picking at each other on the bus. Until that moment, you're just like, what? It's gibberish. It is not clear what's going on, and listening is hard work.
Yeah.
So that is what happens when you communicate some of these out of order when you're sharing to the participants. This was the genius in Joseph Cook, who came up with the original 4 R's. This was the genius of how do I communicate this activity to participants, starting with the result is first, the rules are second, the risks are third, and the resources are fourth. So if I was doing Keypunch, that would look like this. The result is to touch the keys in order as fast as possible. That's the goal of this activity. Mm-hmm. The rules. I go through my list of rules again. The risks. There is no running, jumping, or diving. The resources you have are each other and your creativity. And then I'm going to mention the result one more time. Once again, the goal is through these several trials to have the fastest time possible touching all of the keys in order. So it's result, rules, risks, resources, and then restating the result. Try this sometime. Once you're aware of this methodology, you'll notice when folks go out of this order. And we're not saying this is the only way to do it. There's front loading. There's hundreds of techniques where there'd be reasons to not do this. But if you are just learning, or you are struggling with being clear when you are sharing an activity to the group, or they're just looking at you like, hey, I just told them everything on my sheet. And they're like, I don't get it. It's because either you're telling them too much, or it's out of order in a way that allows them to process the information.
That makes sense. That the out of order makes sense now, Mark.
And inexperienced facilitators usually start with the rules because that's the thing they're most worried about. They don't want to get it wrong. So it's just at the top of the list. So you go up and you're standing around this Keypunch. If you break any of the rules, there's a 10-second penalty. And it's like, 10-second penalty to what?
Why?
Only one person is allowed inside the boundary at a time. Okay. The longer that goes on, the more there's people in the group that just want to like grab the facilitator and shake them and say, what are we doing?
Yes.
Because until they have that question asked, folks have a limited buffer in their memory to process the rules. So they're there. There's nothing to apply them to. And that's where I'm so thankful for Joseph discovering this order in his processing. Since I've started doing this on a regular basis, it's made me more clear when I'm leading an activity. And as I'm mentoring or training less experienced facilitators, it helps them organize the information. So I actually write my write-ups of activities that Workplace Solutions does and creates in this format so that it's clear if you are leading this activity, say these things in this order. You always can deviate from that, but here's a good starting methodology that really works and is proven effective.
I think there's less chance of losing people too if you start with the results, because now I know what you're talking about and I can follow you. So there's less chance of people dipping out and not paying attention.
Yeah, we've been describing this as just verbal instructions, and this works for written instructions as well, or instructions in a video. But if you find that afterwards folks keep asking the same questions, it's because you're not being clear. And that clarity might not be from what you're saying. It might be from the order in which you are saying it. Whenever I hear just this acre list of rules when we're starting an activity and they haven't said what we're actually trying to do, it's so apparent now because of how much I've internalized this methodology.
And you don't pay attention. I just don't pay attention because you're not giving me the information that I know how to process in my brain.
Yep. Something we didn't include on this, a lot of folks love to tell an elaborate story, or especially if you're working with kids, hey, we're doing Keypunch. This is a giant typewriter, and the giant at the top of the beanstalk is typing a letter to Jack down at the bottom so that he doesn't cut his beanstalk down. I don't know if that's a story anyone uses. I just made that up. I didn't make up Jack and the Beanstalk, but you get the point.
No.
But hashtag improv. Woo.
Yeah, there you go.
We're not saying those stories are wrong. Stories are great. Stories are powerful. I think about who my audience is and will a story make this better or worse? If I told the Jack and the Beanstalk story to a group of serious engineers,
not going anywhere.
They're gonna be like, who's this doofus?
Exactly. But that has to go back into reasons too. You have to know your audience. So what we're talking about now ties right back into what's the reason for this. And doofus is a great word, by the way.
Yeah. I like self-deprecating words that aren't cursing. So doofus.
That's a good one.
I'm not calling anyone else a doofus. I'm just saying I act like one.
Saying I do too, and I like that.
And Rhonda's like saying you are one too. Oh man. Some other things we didn't mention in the first half of the episode. During the readiness conversation, this is where I'm thinking about variations or techniques or adjustments I might need to make to my audience. So we mentioned that thing of the serious engineers. Maybe I'm working with a group of middle schoolers, and that means this whole result, rules, risks, and resources thing needs to be, golly, maybe no longer than a minute, a minute and a half, and with as few rules as possible, because they're not going to hear 9 rules. They're
that's a whole different activity with chaos, and we like that too. Yeah.
What's the rules? Touch these in order. Okay.
And only one in there at a time.
Yeah, only one at a time. Okay, done.
Got it.
And that reflection is going to be different than if you are processing a change management system.
Most definitely.
Yeah. We've talked about how do I communicate the activity information to participants. So that's that order of result, rules, risks, resources, and result again. Let's go back to what are some of the things I'm thinking about to make this decision of picking the right activities for the events. Additional things I'm thinking about. Since we've mentioned that there's 8 R's, what's the most important and what's the starting place? And the answer is, it depends.
It always depends.
It always depends. There's a couple different routes depending on where I'm starting. One question I ask myself is, what are the limiting factors that are the hardest to change? So if my limiting factor is environmental, like I'm in a small conference room, I can't leave that conference room, there's other stuff going on at a conference hotel, and this is the environment, and that's what I have to work with, I'm going to choose a table-based activity. Like that's just, this is a table-based environment. I'm not going to play a run-around tag game, in a 12
in a conference room.
Yeah, in a 12 foot by 12 foot conference room. I guess that's not a very conference room, but anyway. So that is the primary limiting factor. in my mind, or at least one of the key limiting factors. So I'm going to start there and look through my list of what activities work in their base thing or can be adapted to a tabletop environment. Maybe my key limiting factor is resources. I have one Keypunch set. I have 100 people. You can do it. There's a way to do it. We're not saying there's not. I personally am not going to be at my best running a single group of 100 through a single Keypunch. It's going to take forever unless we get uber creative, and there's ways to do that, but it might not be worth the time and energy to try to figure that out unless that's the only resource I have. Gotcha. So the resources, it might be, maybe I'm doing a different activity that has a very tight amount of group size where it's effective and I don't have enough sets of that, then I'm going to cross that one off the list for this experience or this group of people. Doesn't mean I can't do it. Doesn't mean there's not ways to figure it out. It just means that's what I'm thinking about. The audience. We already mentioned the serious engineers who, in my pre-pandemic estimation, about a third of people think team building is cheesy and stupid, or have had a negative experience with some sort of experiential learning thing. Like they're already apprehensive, and I don't like cheesy things, which is funny because I love dad jokes, but that's.
And well, it's interesting too, because if they've had that experience and they're not willing to try a new one, what's that all about? So let's go back to our reasons too. And there's a lot of other things there that done right that could be overcome too.
Yeah. Those audience things might be, I've done this activity 50 times with similar groups of this demographic and it worked great. Great. That's a perfectly valid reason. I've experienced this. This is one of my favorite or best activities for this audience to meet this goal. Mm-hmm. It might have something to do with physical or psychological adaptations that are necessary. If I had a group of a retired management board of a Fortune 500 company that weren't super mobile, I'm probably not going to do a running version of Keypunch. Like this, if maybe they can only stand up for 10 minutes at a time is their physical limitation. That's fine. Great. We'll do Keypunch at a table, or we'll choose something else. But I'm thinking about what is the best thing for this group of people.
Yes.
Goals. What are the outcomes that the client who has hired you, or the person who's sponsoring whatever you're doing, what are they trying to accomplish through you? And is there a clear track, thinking like reflection, between what you're doing, what folks will observe and experience, and meeting those goals? If you've been facilitating for a while, a really experienced facilitator can take almost any activity and have almost any conversation, and yet there are some that just are such natural fits for what you want to talk about that it's like, why go through that effort? Whenever possible, let the activity speak for you and build on that momentum and wave. So,
I love that. Yes.
A question you might ask yourself is, am I excited about doing this? And don't underestimate that. If it's an activity you don't like doing, we're not nearly as clever and chameleons as we think we are. Folks pick up on those cues, those
quickly
facial expressions. So if you don't want to be doing it, why on earth would they? So that goes into my mind. Unless you are mandated to do this particular activity, which there's ways to deal with that and get excited about it. But if you're not excited about it, then choose something else.
Exactly.
Has the group done this before, or something similar? So I am a huge proponent of novelty, and maybe that's just how I'm wired, but saying they're paying you to do something new. Well, they're paying you to get an outcome. They're paying you to have an experience, but they're paying you to do something interesting and new. If they did Keypunch last time, you need a legitimate reason why you're doing that one again. And there are reasons. you think of the diminishing returns of the first time a kid goes off the zip line versus the 10th time they've gone off the zip line.
Exactly.
There's something to that power of novelty. And if they've done it before, was it positive? Maybe. Mm-hmm. Does it fit in the sequence? Sequencing is another conversation. Phil and I talked about it in The Power of Play briefly, but we can talk about that more at another time. Is this activity that I'm trying to place in the order of events, does it fit with what happened before it and what's happening after? Is it a good progression that this journey makes sense when somebody else experiences it? That was a lot. Rhonda, what are you thinking about?
I'm thinking that was a lot. That was a lot. But I'm also thinking that it makes sense and it flows. As long as I think setting the basement, if you get the first R right, I think the rest of it, what's the reason for doing this? If you get that right, I think the rest will fall in place. I really do. If you're a seasoned facilitator. If you're a new facilitator, the reasons may not make sense until you've actually walked through them. And if you're a new facilitator, you would have to walk through this whole list before you ever saw your guests. But as a seasoned facilitator, this makes perfect sense, Mark, and adds some clarity to what's happening and why people are doing this.
One thing you could do is take these 8 R's and apply them to a activity that you lead. So pick something that's in your toolbox that you have the resources for and say, all right, what are reasons where I would do this? Write that down. What are the specific rules I need to share when I do this version of this activity? Write that and create that as a document or a training material for your team. In the workshop that we're developing on bringing training to life, that's an exercise that I plan on doing and saying, let's do this and practice this methodology, because it makes a really good checklist to say, did I miss something? Did I figure out the logistics? Oh, did I think about, what am I actually, because if you do some of this stuff by memory, it is often very easy to be like, oh crap, I forgot a rule, or, oh, I've got all my rules set. Oh, I didn't actually set up the activity. Yeah. There's everything's still in my duffel bag. Oh man. So I think about those things. And if you are responsible for training or mentoring less experienced facilitators, and if you're the one choosing the activities for them, great. Then focus on those 4 R's, and I guess it's 5 now if you're saying the result again. But focus on that and as a practice method as well. So.
I agree. Yeah, I love that, Mark. And so it has many purposes right here in getting you ready. Nice work, Mark.
Yep. This episode does not cover everything we will cover in that Train the Trainer workshop, but we hope this is super helpful and useful whenever you lead experiential activities in one of your events. Final thoughts, Rhonda.
I'm looking forward to Train the Trainer and what that offers, because I think that will pull all this together for seasoned and for new people. So yes, this is good information. It's well-rounded information, and it would keep me out of trouble if I was facilitating.
Love it. Final thoughts from my end. We hope this mental model is helpful. Feel free to ask us questions or share stories about your own experience. We want to hear from folks. We don't ask for that nearly enough on the podcast. So write us, follow us on social media, and find a friend and tell them to listen to the podcast and write us a review. That'd be great.
That would be great. That would be great. And find someone who can't pronounce their R's, so I'm not out here by myself.
That's all I had. All right, Rhonda, it has been a blessing and a joy.
It is always great to spend time with you, Mark.
Life is way too short for work to suck. So if you want help to build your team, train your team, or manage your team, we're here. Come see us at workplaysolutions.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast. uber quick icebreaker, whatever we're calling them, a warmergizer. That sounds weird.
Yeah, that. Yeah.